Hi, everyone. Welcome to our author series. We are here today. I'm Jess Weibel. I'm an editor for the Watershed Journal and executive director of the organization. And I'm here to host and introduce Patricia Thrushart, who is ready to read selections from her newest book of poetry called Sanctity. And Sanctity is billed as a walk through the woods with Patricia Thrushart, who is one of our favorite poets. She has written and supported the Watershed Journal. She's been a faithful submitter to our magazine and supported the effort in so many ways. So we're so excited to have her today. She also has books for sale, I should mention, other books of poetry, Girl Against the Wall and Yin and Yang, available at Watershed Books here and online. So she's one of the poets who writes about the Pennsylvania wilds and the forests of the wilds, and her work is very much inspired by the beauty of nature and the natural world. So she'll have a reading for you today, and I'm going to pass it off to Sarah, who's going to talk about the format for today.
Hi, I'm Sarah Rossi. Today, thank you all for joining us. We've got a bunch of people on here. I'm so glad to see you on here. This will be an interactive experience for those of you who are on air meet with us. Check out the chat. And then after Patricia reads, there's going to be a chance to do some Q&A. So if you'd like to join in the Q&A after her reading, you just click that raise hand button and we will get you'll be able to interact with Patricia and ask your questions. So I'm going to bring Patricia on now. Hey there.
Hi there, guys.
Yay.
Hello.
Thanks for having me. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining on Super Bowl Sunday and a cold Sunday, at least up here in the wilds. I'm excited to be here, and I want to start by thanking Sarah and Jess, not just for having me, but for having this author series and everything else they do to support the writers of the Watershed. It's a very special thing. Many of us would not have a forum like this without their support. So I'm deeply appreciative of that, and I know I speak for all of the other writers who have been on the author series, who will be coming on the author series, who have their work printed in the journal and online, and who take advantage of all the workshops and meetings that happen because of the dedication that Sarah and Jess bring to the community. So thanks for that. So as Jess said, I am going to be reading from my new book, which is probably backwards when you're looking at it, but it's called Sanctity. And it is a book of nature poems. And it is meant for us to all draw healing and blessings from the beauty of the natural world. We've all been through so much this year. We've had a pandemic that has robbed us of everything we considered normal to one degree or another. We've soldiered through social unrest and political division, and none of us have been untouched. And so my goal in producing this book, and thanks to my husband, Ray, for publishing it, was to bring some healing to the world in my small way. Because certainly when I look out my window and see the Pennsylvania woods, they bring healing to me. So the book is divided into 4 chapters that go along with the seasons because, quite honestly, the woods transform with every season. Your experience of it is different depending on when you're walking through the woods, when you're in the woods, and depending on what season it's in. And these are simple poems. They're not meant to be terribly demanding intellectually. They're meant to be soothing. So I hope the next 10 or 15 minutes as I read through them is a moment of healing and soothing for you. I'm going to start in the spring. Even though we're in the depths of winter with 6 degrees, I think, for tonight here in the wilds, I'm going to start with spring because spring is beginning. I hear it when I walk and the birds are singing more than they were before. And I know if I didn't have a foot of snow on the ground, I'd see some snowdrops. So let's start with spring. This is called Swallow. Have you seen how the swallow flies in early spring over a still sodden field just greening, careening, twisting with lifts of abandon, rolling through unseen streams of just rinsed air after rain? And your heart lifts with it, lifts with the pure joy of it, lurches left with its bronze body, then dives with it as blue wings fold, until just above the still dried stalks, the slender tips extend, and the whole of the bird shoots up, up, up to the dazzling sun. And that poem first appeared in the Tobacco Literary Arts Journal, published by Clarion University here in the wilds. So before we leave spring, another poem that reminds us of the songs of spring. Spring Night Prayer. The night woods are filled with the fresh songs of frogs, puffed throats stretched to the thinnest veiny green, throbbing with desire, on trembling branches, each song a desperate prayer that the holy vernal water will lie long enough for swampy couplings and white clouds of eggs seeded with promise. So while it seems far away, let's move on to summer. Summer in Northern Appalachia is a very special time, and there's a couple of poems here that I hope brings that memory back to you. The first one is called Appalachian Summer. The slap of a screen door, now without glass. A dog panting in the sun, with shade a foot away. Crickets rubbing legs in the long grass, horses gently snorting clover. A robin's warble near its nest, tree branches rustling. The hum of a faraway mower. Ice rattling in a pitcher of tea, bare feet thudding on the porch, the squeak of a swing. Distant thunder. And this poem is the poem that gives the book its name, Sanctity. Just after dawn, the golden slant of light, fog disentangling from high branches, the smell of coming heat, of warming loam, of seeds rooting, buds breaking open like the heart, hungry for hope, for healing, for all that is holy in a portion of soil, or in that slant of light under lifting fog, a moment of sanctity. So I'll move into fall, a beautiful time in the Pennsylvania wilds, a time of elk bugling, of the maple trees becoming inflamed, the oak trees whispering. It's one of my favorite seasons, although it's hard to pick just one. This poem is called Path. There's a path that runs to the east, the grass grown up from neglect, only the faintest denting from deer moving during the night. On certain days, the drifting sun rises directly there, the light slithering along the weedy heads of seeds, through the trees, reaching me as I wait like a sacrifice in the temple, aligned to catch the golden snake, or a priestess at Newgrange praying as the solstice sun pierces the passage to anoint the dead. I wait, the trees aflame above, the ground glowing from burnished leaves, the sky growing brighter, the light's shaft coiling, ready to crack open my heart. And that brings us to where we are. Well, I'll read one more. I'll read one more from the fall. This is called The Last of the Harvest Moon, and it celebrates what the fall woods mean to some of the most fundamental traditions of Western Pennsylvania and Northern Appalachia, and that is, the hunting season. The Last of the Harvest Moon. The last of the harvest moon slips to a shining silver, thinly veiled by fine clouds rushing east. Summer's lushness withers, fields plowed in, roots dug up, flocks rising and winging south. Come now, moonless lights of black, the wheeling Milky Way, Orion the hunter, sword glittering, the bull's eye gleaming red. Come now. Soon the hunter's moon will rise to warn the buck. The bright woods fill with smoke from campfire and gunshot and hope. And now to winter, where we are now in the seasons, in the beautiful and great cycle of seasons. This is a cycle of 4 poems called Winter Revelations. The first is A Sudden Refuge. When hollows gather up the fog so dense that only the tops of bare trees can be seen from the overpass, when nothing can be perceived from above and nothing can be seen from within, that place becomes a sudden refuge for whatever is sheltering there. It becomes a sudden mystery for whomever passes by, since before everything was revealed. The storm. The forest waits. Fallen snow is girded in ice, ready. The world is silent in its held breath. Clouds hang, gray and swollen. The littlest sparrow is fluffed and still. The tall owl has found shelter, barely visible, in a hollow tree. Revealing beauty. Snow falls, transforms, beautifies the woods as it etches the seed pod in pearl, the bare branch in silver, still protecting roots and bulbs and the hibernating toad. I have seen how it betrays. Once invisible tracks now show the hiding places of mice, the paths of scavenging fox, the feeding trails of deer, wary habits and secret byways, mysterious, covert, now revealed, the vulnerability of truly being seen. And finally, surrender. Today, long lingering snow surrenders a white mist that hangs above the broken stalks of corn, as gold as the fading strands of dawn, blurring the bare trees too wise to bud in this midwinter reprieve, drifting among last year's milk pods, now open and blown, where the drab sparrow flits in hope of a silky seed. And that's where we are, the drab sparrow flitting in hopes of a silky seed, the bulbs ready to push up through the promise of spring. I hope you enjoyed this walk in the woods with me through the seasons. I hope you enjoyed this celebration of the beauty of the Northern Appalachian woods.
Patricia, thank you so much for that reading. It's just so wonderful to hear in your calming voice and presence, which comes across so beautifully on the screen here for us. So thank you for that. And we get a little glimpse of the beautiful backdrop in which you write and, are able to draw inspiration from the scenery around you. So I'm going to start by just asking a few questions, and then I encourage everyone who is tuned in with us today on Air Meet, if you have questions, please raise your hand for Patricia. So First of all, I know this is your third book of poetry that you've published, and so I want to talk to you a little bit about how you went about. Was it a very organic journey for you and an effort in terms of publishing, that you ended up doing something that was, very much about the seasons and the natural world and the surroundings? Or was this something that was very intentional, that you set out to produce a book that would, transport people to the area where you live?
Well, I can't honestly say it was intentional. It's not like I sat down with a blank slate and said, I want to write a book of.
Oh, we may have lost.
We lost you. Oh no!
Because
Okay.
and the reason I say that is I'm writing these poems all the time. This is really that's the organic process. I don't really have to set aside time to write or discipline myself to write poetry. They sort of poems well up inside me in reaction to the beauty I'm seeing or the emotion I'm feeling. So I had these poems written already, and frankly, many of them have been published in other journals. In fact, I neglected to say, that last cycle, Winter Revelations, was published in the Watershed Journal. The Swallow, the poem I started with, was published in Tobacco. Some of the poems I read have been published on Dark Horse Appalachia. So they've been coming and being published, but I just decided that that it was time to pull them together, and it was time for me to share those experiences with readers because of the times that we're in. Mm-hmm. So, and it had been quite some time since I published a poetry book. I have a couple of others written, and they're in the process, but this one I decided needed to come out now. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I also wanted to, I guess, tangentially to that, I know that there's been a lot of discovery and self-discovery about the region that we live in. There's been a lot of momentum towards regional identity and publishing bodies of work that represent our region, Northern Appalachia, as you characterized it. And so I wanted to talk about, has that kind of energy and effort that you've seen swirling around the literary world, has that really informed the way that you are looking at your poetry and the world around you and the area in which you live and write? Or is it sort of the alternative where now you find that there's more of a platform and more of a readership that is tuned into the type of work that you've been doing for years?
Well, I think I would have written these regardless. Had I not plugged into this notion of being part of a larger Appalachian identity and culture, I would have written these regardless. But I think understanding that these poems and some of the poems I've written about the people that I've encountered, they do plug into a larger sense of identity, a larger canon of work. And in some ways, I feel that just amplifies them. Mm-hmm. We've all read the controversy around the Appalachian identity. There's been a lot of academic and grassroots discussion about what it means to be from Appalachia, to be writing and living in Appalachia. What is Appalachia? Certainly everyone understands, Southern and Central Appalachia, and much of what's written is about those regions. So I do feel that plugging this into that greater sense of Appalachian identity has made a difference for me. I would have still written the poems, mm-hmm. but it places those poems in that context.
Wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, I'm such a fan of your work, and I think that you're able to characterize, a very authentic feeling of it. Really does feel like we're on a walk with you through the woods, and so I just love that about what you're able to do, whether it's through character portraits. I've seen poetry that's very, very different in terms of the subject for you, and but regardless, it's always just a very keen characterization of a moment in time or a feeling. And I always really appreciate how spot on you are in terms of authenticity and tapping into something. So I'm going to open it up to, because I could gush all day long, but I'll open it up to everyone here. What questions do you have or comments about specific poems? Were there ones that you liked, seasons that you appreciated, in terms of her writing? What ideas do you have to bring? And we can put you on the screen here. Give everybody a moment.
In the meantime, we had one comment, so beautiful. I was there, nice to hear what I saw for so many years. And another, Wayne says, nicely done. I needed that. So that's great. And feel free to leave your comments in the comments or to raise your hand. And there we go. Come on, Tabby. Oop, we lost Joe.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
There we go. Oh. Okay, Joe, I'm so sorry. The way we set this up, I'm coming right back for you.
Sure.
Abby, and let's see if I can pin you on here.
Yeah, that's all right.
And
don't worry.
I'm coming for you. No, don't worry. I'm coming.
So, Tabby, we've invited you back to the stage.
Yay!
Wonderful. Okay.
Am I here?
You're here.
Okay. I just thank you so much for your lovely reading. It is wonderful indeed to hear you in your wonderful, calming voice, and to take us to these places that some of us are familiar with, that we all share. I want to ask if, and we all are familiar with like plein air painting, where artists set up their little easels outside and have sort of this direct relationship with what they're observing and feeling and smelling and hearing. And I know that there's plein air writing as well. Do you have a favorite spot that you set up somewhere? I know you live in a wonderful area that, it's spoiled for beauty. But I'd like you to, talk about that a little bit. If you ever set up outside in the outdoors and are inspired and have the opportunity to write directly in your journal or on your laptop, or to do some plein air writing.
I love that idea, Tabby. I mean, I love calling it plein air writing because, like you, I've always loved plein air painting, even contemporary plein air artists. There's a group of them in Pittsburgh that I've followed for a long time, and I've just never thought of using that term for writing, and I love it. But yes, I do a lot of writing outdoors. Most of my writing about the woods is inspired from the walks that I take every day. And it's, the dogs look at me with puzzlement when I suddenly stop in the middle of, the driveway or the road and start typing furiously into my phone, which is often the best way I have to capture a thought. Or take a photo too to go along with it. But like The Path, that poem I wrote, that is absolutely from a walk that I took. And at certain times of the year, there's a path to the east, and the sun rises directly over it. And I felt like I was in Newgrange or at Teotihuacan or someplace with the sun.
Uh-oh.
Okay, she should come back on here in just a second, Tabby. We still got you.
I know I'm missing what you said. What did you say?
You couldn't hear me?
Oh, you cut out, Joe. We will put you back now.
You were describing that scene where the sun comes through and how you were
Yeah.
transported, and then that's where you kind of got cut off.
Oh, okay. And I was saying I wrote that poem right there. I thought of myself as being at New Grange or at Teotihuacan, aligned to the sun, and I wrote it right there. So that is very true. It's like I said, I'm going to steal that term from you. Plein air, right?
I think we should do some workshopping outdoors when the weather is better. I think that would be a wonderful thing to do.
That's a great idea.
And you could lead us.
Yeah. Hey, I'm all for it. And why don't we paint too while we're at it?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Come on. It can be, it can be abstract.
Good. Well, thanks for answering my question, because I was just transported to the place in your poems is so strong and evocative. So I just had in my mind you sitting someplace, observing or standing, taking that moment, and I just wanted to see how you do that in your process of writing. So thank you for answering my question.
Of course. Thanks for asking.
Thank you, Tabby.
Bye, guys.
Bye. All right, who is next? Who has questions for Joe? Patricia. Thank you. Wayne is not offering his hand, but he has a question. Do you have any nature poets that you read regularly?
I do. I read so many different poets, and I just love so many different poems, and but certainly Mary Oliver is one of my favorites. What I love about Mary Oliver is, and I admire this so much in her, is that she makes every poem still about the interior human landscape. Not just, she's not just describing some incredible scene or some creature like the swan. If you've never read her poem, The Swan, look it up. But she ties it back to the human experience. The nature becomes a tremendous metaphor for the human experience. And it's my sense that Mary Oliver for many years was somewhat discounted because her poetry was nature poetry and wasn't seen as dealing with, more direct human issues. But I obviously disagree with that. I love Wendell Berry. His book, The Peace of Wild Things, is one I go back to. But I would say that most poets write about a sense of place, and often that place is a moment of peace in nature. Think of James Wright and his poem, A Blessing, which describes a moment when he and his friend are by a fence and two ponies trot up to them. So there's many, but Mary Oliver and Wendell Berry are certainly contemporary poets that I really love.
All right. Who is next? Who would like to come on with Joe and ask a question? We've got some interesting discussion going on in the comments. Fred comments that the dogs look at me with puzzlement when I stop to write. That calls for writing piece in itself. And we have an email address. I won't try to say the name. Dr. Professor Emeritus. Fred Wilbur reminds me of the line by Frost. My horse must think it queer. Must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. I love that.
Yeah, I was remiss in not mentioning Robert Frost. There are certain poems that are just sort of in your DNA once you write nature poetry, and he'd be one of them.
All right, who else? Who else has a question or comment for Joe?
We'll do a last call before our big surprise.
One last chance. Okay. Well, I'm going to bring someone on here.
Joe, do you want to introduce, or Patricia, I'm sorry, do you want to introduce our surprise guest?
Oh, well, I'll start, and then, hopefully you can add. So I wanted to invite Wayne Swanger to join me and spend some time with us. Wayne has written a book, The Fields of His Heart, which was published by the Watershed Journal Literary Group. It's the first book that the group has published under its own press. It's a collaborative press, and it's a really wonderful set of poems. And I thought that, rather than have you listen to me the whole time, that I would ask Wayne to come on and share some of his poetry. We work together in a number of ways. We're both in a Renshi group, which maybe he'll explain a little bit later, which means one poet writes based on what the earlier poet wrote. And then, we both being poets of the Watershed, our paths cross so often. So I'm delighted to have him join me and share some of his work.
Yes, thank you so much, Wayne, for joining us today. As Patricia mentioned, you have your first debut book of poetry, Fields of His Heart, which is available at Watershed Books and online. And we're just so thrilled to be able to listen to you read your work. I think you and Patricia both complement each other so well in terms of, very distinct styles and voices in your poetry, but both very much rooted in a sense of place. And it's just such a pleasure to be able to have the opportunity to hear both of you read. So I know we're all looking forward to it, and I'll let you get into it.
Well, if I'd have known I was going to be introduced as a big surprise, I'd have suggested maybe a pig in a poke would have been a better introduction. But thank you very much for inviting me to read. Patricia, this is your moment, and I look forward to reading your book, and I enjoyed hearing your poems. And thanks, Jess and Sarah, for having me on. Sanctity, what a great title for a book. And it's a wonderful theme for a collection of poems. And I tried to use that theme as I selected a couple of poems to share this afternoon. But I just had a panic attack before I came on, thinking maybe as I read these, they won't think sanctity is quite the term. Maybe they'll consider sanctimonious as a better word or a title. But I'm going to read poems that might be classified as Quaker poems by some, because these poems were generally written out of the silence during Quaker meeting. And I prefer to call them whisper poems, as friends try to remain open to that inner small voice of the Spirit of God during meeting. So these poems have been visited upon me in the silence over the span of the past 20 years or so. Whisper poems have many functions for me. For example, this first poem was one that I shared years ago in Oshkosh. It helps to explain Quaker practice, the idea of silent worship, and it's entitled Silent Worship. Silent worship. Apparently, the questioner considered sitting quietly and expectantly a tedious business, and such an hour spent in approximation of eternal damnation. My reply: once, while kneeling and toiling quietly among the lilies and foxgloves, I sensed a perfect humming. Turning my head, I found myself beak to beak with Ruby Throat, the perfect hummer. Over the years, I've spent countless hours quietly toiling, seeking another encounter. My success matters not, for both the garden and I have benefited from the effort. Occasionally, these whisper poems will address some sort of theological concern, and I might say that these poems are basically written down verbatim from what has somehow settled on me during meeting. This one answers a theological question that I've had recently, and it's called Answer. Once I spent hours, days, years in pursuit of living a spiritual life in this human world. Classes, workshops, Bible studies, discussion groups. I thought this the most difficult and truest path. Until I entered the silence with this question: how can I be more loving?
Oh, that's lovely.
Oh, thank you. Don't thank me. Sometimes whisper poems can comfort at times of distress. In fact, this particular whisper came to me after a friend had committed suicide, and I was dealing, with the aftermath of that. And it's called Solace. Solace. Occasionally, in the midst of tragedy and distress, we enter the silence. Stillness whispers, all will be well.
I love this language that we're both sharing, Wayne. You've talked about solace, and at one point I actually thought about naming this book Solace. And I named it Sanctity because of that poem that I wrote. But we're touching on the same things, the need we have for silence, for sanctity, for solace, for healing.
Yes, yeah. And sometimes whisper poems address an inner, kind of a personal conflict. This poem was first spoken at a meeting the day after I attended a peace rally in northern Wisconsin. And it's called Compassion, a Missed Opportunity. Compassion, a Missed Opportunity. The old man, holding a cardboard sign stapled to two pieces of wood, stood on the periphery of the crowd. His body tensed as he strained to keep the sign aloft. Staring straight ahead, he spoke to no one, as if he could get the speaker's attention by resolve alone. The man moved to the center of the crowd and held the sign in front of the speaker, who gave no indication of notice. He slowly turned around, and the crowd read this message written in a coarse hand. I trust my life and the lives of my two Marine sons in the hands of the President. God bless America. I, who believe his trust given to the untrustworthy and his faith rested on the shifting sands of politics, felt pity for this father of two beloved sons. Today, just a day later, I regret not following the old man as he left the crowd. I might have offered him my hand and bought him a cup of coffee. I could have asked him his sons' names and where they are stationed, smiled, nodded, and said that he must be proud of his boys. I should have wished them both peace and God's protection. I did have regrets that I did not go and extend a hand of friendship to that gentleman. I often think about him. And finally, I don't know how much time I have, but...
No, fine. Keep one more, certainly.
Okay. I'm debating. I've got two here that I'm trying to decide. I think I'll read this one if I can find it quickly. It's I received a call one day on the phone and answered it, and I said to a friend who was calling from the Midwest, I said, where are you? And he says, I'm coming home from brain surgery. And he was in the car, and I said, oh. I said, and then he explained his situation. And I said, well, I'll be out that way in a week or two, and I'll stop in and see you. And so after the visit with him, this poem is the result. It's called choice. He bows, taps the crown of his head, the split between heaven and earth. A puzzling declaration given the object a fresh scar, discolored, ripped into his cranium a few days prior. Raw ugliness now morphed into a macabre montage of sutures, bristles, flesh, like a grotesque caterpillar that stretches ear to ear. They messed up my part. Grin turns to grimace. Eyes welling, he gulps, places his hand on his throat, mumbles something about tubes and swelling, other masses, more chemo, radiation, and the irony of choosing this over heaven. Enough.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you.
I love the idea of these being whisper poems. That I don't think I've heard you describe them that way before. That's really moving.
Well, thank you.
We have a comment from Denise who says, "Your poetry brings such an open door to your heart. Both are amazing gifts to the world. Thank you."
Thank you.
Yeah, that's. I feel like it's such a humble way of putting. What is the word I'm looking for? The silence is not just a gift that you find. The silence seems to be a ritual or a discipline that you follow as well. And I feel like that's a side of the silence that that really comes out in your poetry. That a lot of what you talk about reminds me of Zen Buddhism. The path is not the path that you say it is. The path is the path as it unfolds to you. And I think the challenge as a writer is to convey that to an audience, not as this is the truth, but as here is a sliver of something real and tangible. And I think that's how your poetry hits me personally. I get I said to everyone in the room to pardon me weeping as you read, because it always hits me so emotionally because it's just so deeply personal. And I think that Denise, you got it on the nose. Is because you write with an open heart and without anger. And I think that's a balance that is very difficult to find. So thank you, Wayne.
Thank you. I have a question. Where can we find Sanctity? Where can we find the book? How can we get it?
Well, questions.
Thank you for asking that. So right now you can get it through the Watershed books, but on their online bookstore. Is it bookstore.org, Sarah?
Bookshop.
Bookshop.org. Sorry, I always get that mixed up.
Okay. You can also find on watershedjournal.org a link to that as well.
So you can go out on the watershedjournal.org and you can link to their virtual online bookstore, and they will, it'll support the bookstore, and that, I have to be honest, is certainly my preference. It is available on Amazon, and I will have physical books delivered to the store once they're finally printed. So I apologize for that. I guess, frankly, I think COVID is causing a lot of delay, and we've read about that in some of the industry newspapers about the delay in getting books printed. So, but you certainly can order it through Amazon or through Watershed Books from the Watershed Journal website, and my website as well.
PatriciaThrushart.com.
Thanks, Sarah. Yep. I wanted to mention that last poem that Wayne read, I happen to know, was a poem he wrote as part of this group that he and I and several other poets are in. We call it Wrenchy, and he'd be far better to explain it than me. But basically, each poet takes the last line of the poet's work before and starts a new poem. I actually followed him on that poem. Mm-hmm. So I had to use the irony of choosing this over heaven as my first poem. And I bring this up because we're going to be back reading cycles from our collaborative work. I think it's February 21st at 2, right? Jess and Sarah?
Yes. So not next Sunday, but the Sunday after.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's, Wayne, how many poets are in that group? Is it 6? I'm trying to remember. But some really wonderful poets, some wonderful voices. And you'll hear how each poet has to pick up from the ending of the poet before, and we're all going to be there to read these in our own voices. And I think you'll enjoy it. So please try to come back on the 21st at 2 and give a listen.
Yeah, we'll be streaming that much the same as this afternoon. We'll stream that through AirMeet and should be live on Facebook as well and YouTube. So, that'll be another opportunity. And yes, I'm so looking forward to that. And it's perfect. You and Wayne are the perfect kind of segue into that event since you both participate in it. And Wayne, of course, encouraging so many writers with this practice, which is really a wonderful way to create momentum in your work and inspiration. So I also wanted to mention that I so appreciate, Patricia, you for being here and sharing your work with us, and Wayne as well for coming on and doing his reading. And we will continue to be hosting our author series and other literary events with the hopes, we'll be virtual for now, with the hopes that at some point, I love to have this idea about being outside and writing outside, and we've got a great outdoor space here by Watershed Books to be able to host some outdoor readings too. So we're just waiting for that snow to melt. We're waiting for, to be able to feel more comfortable gathering together, and then we'll be able to do all of this, in the same space, and I'm really looking forward to that. Anything else you wanted to say?
The newest edition of the Watershed Journal is available at Watershed Books right now. Submissions, yay! Very nice. Submissions for the spring edition actually start next Monday on the 15th. So be thinking about what you want to put together for that. And there's a lot of events that we have going on, and I've been trying to plug in with Tobacco and Clarion, and they've been starting to do some online events as well. So check out the watershedjournal.org/calendar to keep up with all of the great happenings going on. If you have an idea for a live literary event that you would like to host, please get a hold of us at thewatershedjournal@gmail.com. We'd love to have you on here. And other than that, I think thank you all for
this is a wonderful group. So
so
glad you all could be here with us today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for joining me. Thank you, Wayne, for being my surprise guest. And I appreciated the chance to read with you, and look forward to the next author series and reading from our collaborative cycle and all the other fantastic events that Sarah and Jess work so hard to bring to the community. So thanks everybody. And I don't know who you're rooting for the Super Bowl, but I don't want Tom Brady.
I don't know who's playing, so yeah. I'm both trying really hard.
Well, I'm using it as an excuse to drink a Jameson and ginger. I'm just
saying. That I
so classy. I just love it.
All right, thank you, everyone.